Why do we need to take into consideration gender when we're looking at climate change adaptation, Agnes?
Thanks. We work on climate change and gender from two main angles. There are two main perspectives to this. On the one hand, Care International as a whole, whether or not working on climate change, recognizes that gender equality is a hugely important goal for development in its own right. It's a human right, and we need to work to ensure that everything we do reaches men and women equitably and enhances their human rights. But at the same time, in our work on climate change adaptation and mitigation, we also see that if we do not take into account the differentiated needs and priorities, voices, issues that women and men face on the ground, in other words, if we are so-called gender blind, we basically miss out on half of the world's population, and what we do doesn't reach everybody and is not sustainable and not effective.
And give us an example of the dangers of being, as you say, gender blind.
Well, the saddest example I can mention at this point is that maybe you've seen there's a study from the London School of Economics that was conducted in 2007. They looked at the impacts of disasters over 20 years, just 21 years, on the ground in over 140 countries. And they discovered that out of the people dying as a consequence of natural disaster, the large majority were women. And now the intuitive assumption a lot of people may have about this is that it's because of biological or biophysical factors, women being weaker, thereby dying more frequently than men as a result of disaster. But what that study actually discovered is that it's not biophysical factors, it's not physical weakness, it's basically women's socioeconomic status and human rights status in their countries that results in them dying earlier and more frequently as a result of disaster. So if you're gender blind, that's the consequence you face.
Sure, and I mean, is this as much a development issue as it is a climate change issue? Does associating it with climate change kind of confuse matters?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Well, I'm saying, is this as much a development issue in terms of international development moving forward as it is climate change? What are the specific links between gender and climate change for you?
The specific links, and you're correct in saying that it really confuses often matters with development. And of course, looking into the climate change impacts on the ground, we are reminded that we need to do our homework on the development side and ensure gender equality and gender equity in everything we do. But to mention a few examples, we know that climate change is pretty much about water. It's about water in rainfall patterns changing, it's about droughts. On the ground, it means that people have less access to water. It means they have less water to irrigate, or at times when they need sunshine, they get huge floods and rains coming and washing everything away. So these are the specific sectors that we need to look at: food security, agriculture, water. And in all of these sectors, we see that women face huge burdens in securing food security for their families. They are largely responsible for doing that. They're largely responsible for going to get water to feed their families with, to cook with, to irrigate their fields with. And climate change is having a particularly detrimental impact on their workload, on their burdens that they face when they do that. And it reduces their already minimized access to resources.
And I guess finally, what practical action can you take to change this model, this paradigm? There's been a lot of talk today about changing the text within some of the treaties, the UNFCCC and other UN organisations, but you know that in a sense is right at the top level. What at the bottom level can you do and have you been doing to change this situation?
Well, with all of the things I've just mentioned, it's really important to remember that women are not just victims. They're not just passive victims of something that's going on completely beyond their control, and that we need to extend a helping hand out to help them with. We need to remember that women are agents of change as much as everyone else, and that they can take their destiny into their own hands, and when they do so, and when they're empowered to do so, they do that incredibly well. So what CARE has been doing to work with women on the ground is to empower them socially and economically, to diversify their options, to increase their access to the key resources that they need to manage their resources well, and they go ahead and do it.
And how do you empower them? Can you give us an example of how you can? I mean, it's a term that's often used, but how do you empower women around the world? What are the key steps you need to take and other organisations need to take?
I think it often very much starts with economic empowerment. We talk about human rights, social rights, political rights, but what's really important in communities is for women to be more in control of what happens to assets at the household level, at the community level. And the practical approach that you can take there, and it has worked very well for care in many countries all over the world, starting from Niger, is to get them together in so-called village savings and loans groups, where they convene around the table once in a week. They save small amounts of money together. It's a vehicle to teach them how to read, teach them how to count, teach them how to do business. And then they go off and do wonderful things with the money that they save together. Their husbands recognize that an empowered, economically empowered woman brings something to the table, and then follow the other steps, the political involvement, the involvement at decision-making at community level. It's a gradual process, and it sounds easier than it is when I say it here and now, but we do have great experiences with that approach, and it has worked really well.